Ryland and Scarlett Hartley, both successful professionals in their mid-30s, were pillars of the community. Zoe Hartley, their cherubic 5-year-old, appeared to be the light of their lives. To the casual observer, the Hartleys seemed to be living a charmed existence. Neighbors would often comment on how devoted Ryland and Scarlett were to their only child, never missing a school event or a chance to shower her with affection. But beneath the polished veneer of perfection, a sinister secret festered. The truth about what went on behind the Hartleys' closed doors would shock the community to its core and leave many questioning how well they truly knew their neighbors. Ryland Hartley was a respected pediatrician at Millbrook General Hospital, known for his gentle bedside manner and dedication to his young patients. His wife Scarlett worked as a guidance counselor at the local high school, where she was beloved by students and faculty alike for her compassionate nature and sage advice. The couple had met in college and married soon after graduation. They seemed destined for greatness from the start, with their complementary careers and shared passion for helping others. When Zoe was born 5 years ago, their joy appeared complete. Neighbors recalled how Ryland and Scarlett would take turns pushing Zoe in her stroller, beaming with pride as passers-by cooed over their beautiful baby girl. As Zoe grew, the Hartleys' commitment to their daughter seemed unwavering. They enrolled her in the best preschool in town and signed her up for a plethora of enriching activities: ballet, swimming lessons, and even a toddler art class. Scarlett was always volunteering for the PTA, while Ryland coached the local youth soccer team in his spare time. The Hartley home became a hub of playdates and neighborhood gatherings. Scarlett was known for her homemade cookies and elaborately decorated birthday cakes, while Ryland would entertain the children with magic tricks and silly voices. Their backyard barbecues were legendary, with families from all over Millbrook clamoring for an invitation. At her young age, Zoe seemed to be following in her parents' footsteps. She was outgoing and precocious, always ready with a smile or a hug for her parents' friends. Her preschool teachers praised her creativity and kindness, noting how she always shared her toys and comforted other children when they were upset. The family's social media presence further cemented their image of perfection. Scarlett's Instagram account was a carefully curated collection of heartwarming family moments: Zoe's first steps, family vacations to the beach, and cozy movie nights at home. Ryland's Facebook page was filled with proud posts about Zoe's accomplishments and photos of the family volunteering at local charities. Even in times of stress, the Hartleys seemed to handle everything with grace. When Ryland's mother passed away, the couple organized a beautiful memorial service and set up a scholarship fund in her name at the local community college. When a neighbor lost their job, it was Scarlett who rallied the community to provide meals and support. To the outside world, the Hartleys were the embodiment of the perfect American family. They were successful but humble, involved in their community but never boastful. They seemed to have mastered the delicate balance of career and family life that so many strive for. Little did anyone suspect that behind this meticulously crafted image lay a dark and disturbing reality. The truth about what was happening to young Zoe Hartley would soon shatter the illusion of perfection and leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about the family they had admired for so long. The first cracks in the Hartleys' perfect facade began to appear shortly after Zoe's 4th birthday. What started as occasional complaints of stomach aches soon escalated into more concerning symptoms. Zoe began to experience frequent bouts of nausea, unexplained fatigue, and dizzy spells that would sometimes cause her to stumble or fall. At first, Ryland and Scarlett appeared appropriately concerned, scheduling appointments with various specialists and running a battery of tests. Ryland's colleagues at the hospital were more than willing to expedite the process, given his respected status in the medical community. Yet despite their efforts, no clear diagnosis emerged. Zoe's preschool teachers noticed the change in the once energetic child. Where she had once been the first to volunteer for activities, she now often sat quietly, her usual sparkle dimmed. They shared their observations with the Hartleys, who nodded gravely and assured them they were doing everything they could to get to the bottom of Zoe's mysterious illness. As weeks turned into months, Zoe's condition seemed to worsen. She began to lose weight, her golden curls lost their luster, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. The community rallied around the family, offering meals, childcare, and words of support. Scarlett's social media posts took on a more somber tone, sharing updates on Zoe's health and expressing gratitude for the outpouring of love from friends and neighbors. Ryland threw himself into researching rare pediatric disorders, often staying late at the hospital to consult with colleagues and pore over medical journals. Scarlett took a leave of absence from her job to care for Zoe full-time, documenting every symptom and reaction in a thick binder she carried to each doctor's appointment. Despite their apparent dedication, some began to notice odd inconsistencies in the Hartleys' behavior. A neighbor reported seeing Zoe playing energetically in the backyard one afternoon, only to hear Scarlett describe her as too weak to get out of bed that same evening. A nurse at the hospital whispered about how Zoe's symptoms seemed to worsen whenever Ryland was on shift, only to improve mysteriously when he was away. These observations were quickly dismissed by most as coincidences or misunderstandings. After all, the Hartleys were pillars of the community, devoted parents who were living every family's worst nightmare. No one wanted to believe that there could be anything sinister behind Zoe's illness. But as the mystery deepened, so too did the shadows lurking beneath the surface of the Hartleys' perfect life. As Zoe's condition continued to deteriorate, the Hartleys' lives began to revolve entirely around their daughter's mysterious illness. Hospital visits became more frequent, with Zoe enduring an endless parade of tests, scans, and consultations. The medical bills started to pile up despite Ryland's good insurance, and the strain began to show on both parents. Scarlett, once the picture of poise and composure, now appeared haggard and distracted at community events. Her normally impeccable appearance gave way to unwashed hair and rumpled clothes. She would corner friends and acquaintances, launching into detailed descriptions of Zoe's latest symptoms and treatments, her eyes taking on a fervent, almost manic gleam as she spoke. Ryland, too, showed signs of stress. His colleagues noted that he seemed distracted at work, making uncharacteristic mistakes and snapping at nurses. He began to lose weight, and dark circles appeared under his eyes, mirroring those of his ailing daughter. At social gatherings, he would often stand apart, nursing a drink and staring into the distance with a troubled expression. As news of Zoe's worsening condition spread through Millbrook, the community's support intensified. A GoFundMe page set up by a well-meaning neighbor quickly surpassed its goal, with donations pouring in from all over town. Meals appeared on the Hartleys' doorstep daily, and offers to help with housework or errands were constant. Despite the outpouring of support, whispers of doubt began to circulate. Some found it strange that Ryland, a pediatrician himself, seemed unable to pin down a diagnosis for his own daughter. Others questioned the need for such extensive fundraising, given the Hartleys' comfortable financial situation. These murmurs were quickly shushed by the majority, who saw them as cruel gossip in the face of a family's suffering. As months passed, Zoe's world shrank to the confines of her home in the hospital. She was withdrawn from preschool, too weak to attend regularly. Her once frequent playdates dwindled to nothing as the Hartleys cited concerns about her weakened immune system. The little girl who had once been the life of the neighborhood became a ghost, glimpsed only occasionally through the windows of the family home or during hurried trips to the car for another medical appointment. The Hartleys' marriage showed signs of strain under the pressure. Neighbors reported hearing heated arguments late at night, though the couple maintained a united front in public. Scarlett threw herself into researching alternative treatments and experimental therapies, while Ryland became increasingly withdrawn, spending more and more time at the hospital, even when he wasn't on shift. Throughout it all, Zoe's condition continued to baffle medical professionals. Her symptoms seemed to shift and change, defying traditional diagnostic criteria. One week she would suffer from severe gastrointestinal distress, the next from neurological symptoms that left her disoriented and weak. Blood tests showed fluctuating abnormalities that never quite fit any known disease profile. As the mystery deepened, so did the community's investment in Zoe's story. Prayer groups were formed, charity events were organized, and blue ribbons, Zoe's favorite color, began to appear on trees and lampposts throughout Millbrook. The Hartleys found themselves at the center of a storm of attention and sympathy, their every move watched and discussed by a town desperate for good news. Little did anyone realize that the true nature of Zoe's illness was far more sinister than they could have imagined, and that the greatest threat to the little girl's life lurked not in some rare disease, but within the very home that was supposed to be her safe haven. While the community rallied around the Hartleys, the reality within the walls of their home was far from the image of loving dedication they projected to the world. In the privacy of their kitchen late at night, when Zoe was asleep, Ryland and Scarlett Hartley's true nature began to reveal itself. Scarlett stood at the kitchen island, methodically grinding a mixture of pills into a fine powder. Her once manicured hands, now dry and cracked from constant washing, moved with practiced efficiency. Ryland leaned against the counter, watching his wife with a mixture of apprehension and resigned complicity. "We need to be careful," Ryland muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Patel was asking questions about the latest blood work. I managed to deflect, but we can't keep this up forever." Scarlett's hands stilled for a moment, her eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. "We've come too far to stop now," she hissed. "Do you want to go back to being nobodies? Just another couple struggling to pay the bills, forgotten by everyone?" Ryland ran a hand through his hair, conflict evident on his face. "Of course not," he replied. "But Zoe, she's getting worse. What if we've gone too far?" For a moment, something like doubt flickered across Scarlett's features. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by a mask of determination. "She's strong," she said, more to herself than to Ryland. "She'll pull through. And when she does, we'll be set for life. Think of the book deals, the interviews, maybe even a movie. We'll be the parents who never gave up, who fought against all odds for their little girl." Ryland nodded slowly, allowing his wife's words to wash over him, soothing his conscience. "You're right," he said finally. "We've come too far to turn back now." As they continued their grim work, neither noticed the small figure hovering in the shadows of the hallway. Zoe, awakened by thirst, had crept downstairs for a glass of water. She watched her parents with wide, confused eyes, unable to comprehend the scene before her, but instinctively understanding that something was very wrong. The next morning, as Scarlett prepared Zoe's breakfast, her movements were deliberate and careful. She smiled brightly at her daughter, spooning oatmeal into a bowl and adding a generous drizzle of honey, Zoe's favorite. "Here you go, sweetie," she cooed, placing the bowl in front of the little girl. "Eat up, you need your strength." Zoe stared at the bowl, her appetite gone. Her tummy hurt, as it often did these days, and the thought of eating made her feel sick, but she knew better than to refuse. The one time she had pushed her food away, her mother's eyes had gone cold and hard, and her father had gripped her arm so tightly it left bruises. So she picked up her spoon with a trembling hand and began to eat. As Zoe forced down each spoonful, Scarlett busied herself around the kitchen, humming cheerfully. She paused to snap a photo of Zoe, captioning it for her Instagram. The contrast between Scarlett's public persona and her private actions was stark. Online, she was the devoted mother tirelessly advocating for her sick child. In reality, she was the architect of Zoe's suffering, driven by a twisted desire for attention and validation. Ryland, for his part, threw himself into his work at the hospital. He took on extra shifts, partly to avoid being at home, and partly to maintain the image of the dedicated doctor-father. When colleagues inquired about Zoe, he would sigh heavily and launch into detailed medical explanations, skillfully deflecting any questions that came too close to the truth. At home, the Hartleys maintained their charade, even in private, as if afraid that dropping the act for even a moment might shatter the elaborate lie they had constructed. They spoke to Zoe in soothing, concerned tones, assuring her that they were doing everything they could to make her better. But their touches were mechanical, their embraces lacking the warmth of genuine parental love. Zoe, as young as she was, sensed the wrongness in her world. She began to associate her parents' attention with pain and sickness. When they approached her with medicine or food, she would shrink away, her body instinctively trying to protect itself, even as her mind struggled to understand why. As the days wore on, the weight of their deception began to take its toll on the Hartleys. Ryland drank more heavily, while Scarlett's mood swings became more pronounced. The loving couple that the town of Millbrook thought they knew was crumbling behind closed doors, held together only by the terrible secret they shared and the fear of what would happen if the truth ever came to light. As Zoe's condition continued to deteriorate, the medical community in Millbrook found itself increasingly baffled. Anita Sharma, the lead pediatrician assigned to Zoe's case, called a conference with her colleagues to discuss the perplexing symptoms that seemed to defy explanation. The doctors gathered in a sterile conference room at Millbrook General, surrounded by X-rays and lab reports. Dr. Sharma stood at the head of the table, her usually calm demeanor betraying hints of frustration as she addressed her peers. "Gentlemen, ladies," she began, "we're dealing with a medical mystery unlike anything I've seen in my 20 years of practice. Zoe Hartley's symptoms are inconsistent and seem to shift almost weekly. Just when we think we're closing in on a diagnosis, her condition changes course. One week we're seeing severe gastrointestinal distress consistent with poisoning, but then it clears up inexplicably. The next, she's presenting with neurological symptoms that suggest an entirely different etiology. It's as if we're chasing a moving target." The discussion continued with theories proposed and discarded. Some argued for more invasive testing, while others suggested bringing in specialists from out of state. Through it all, the specter of potential abuse loomed large, unspoken but ever present as the meeting adjourned. Dr. Sharma found herself standing alone, staring at Zoe's latest brain scan. Something wasn't adding up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, across town, Nurse Olivia Chen was finishing up her shift in the pediatric ward. As she updated patient charts, her mind kept drifting back to her interactions with the Hartley family. Something about their behavior had always struck her as off. She recalled how Zoe's symptoms often seemed to worsen when Ryland was on duty at the hospital, only to improve when he was away. She remembered the time she had walked in on Scarlett, hastily shoving something into her purse, looking flustered and guilty. Nurse Chen had tried to dismiss these observations, telling herself she was imagining things. After all, the Hartleys were pillars of the community. But as she hung up her scrubs and prepared to head home, she made a decision. Tomorrow she would speak to Dr. Sharma about her concerns. Better to be overcautious than to ignore a potentially dangerous situation. Little did she know her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would soon unravel the Hartleys' carefully constructed facade. The following morning, Nurse Chen's quiet words to Dr. Sharma sent ripples through the hospital administration. Within hours, a discreet call was made to Child Protective Services, and by afternoon, Detective Lionel Groves of the Millbrook Police Department had been brought into the loop. Detective Groves, a veteran of the force, approached the case with a mix of skepticism and concern. He'd seen his fair share of false alarms and mistaken suspicions, but he'd also encountered cases where the unthinkable turned out to be true. Over the next few days, Groves delved into the couple's background. On the surface, everything checked out. Both had stellar academic records, no criminal history, and were well regarded in their professional and social circles. But as he dug deeper, small discrepancies began to emerge. Financial records showed a pattern of large withdrawals coinciding with Zoe's hospital stays, far exceeding what would be expected for medical expenses. Social media posts from before Zoe's illness painted a picture of a couple struggling with the pressures of work and parenthood, a far cry from the devoted, almost saintly image they now projected. Most troubling were the pharmacy records. Using his law enforcement credentials, Groves discovered that Ryland had been prescribing unusual combinations of medications, often in doses that seemed excessive for a child of Zoe's age and size. As the evidence mounted, Detective Groves knew he needed to tread carefully. Accusing prominent community members of child abuse was no small matter, especially with the circumstantial nature of the evidence. He decided to bring in reinforcements. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. Zoe's preschool teacher, Miss Abigail Foster, had been following the news of her former student's illness with growing concern. One evening, as she was cleaning out her classroom, she came across an old art project of Zoe's that gave her pause. The drawing, made just weeks before Zoe's mysterious symptoms began, showed a stick figure girl with a sad face surrounded by what looked like pill bottles. In childish scrawl across the top were the words, "Mommy's special medicine makes me sick." With shaking hands, Miss Foster picked up her phone and called the police tip line that had been set up for Zoe's case. Within an hour, Detective Groves was at the preschool, carefully bagging the drawing as evidence. As the evidence mounted, Ryland Hartley broke down under questioning. In a voice barely above a whisper, he confessed to the unthinkable. "It was Scarlett's idea at first," he said, his eyes vacant and haunted. "She said it would just be for a little while, to get some attention, and maybe some financial help, but it spiraled out of control. Scarlett, however, remained defiant. Even as she was presented with the evidence, she maintained her innocence, claiming she was only trying to care for her sick child. But her carefully constructed facade was crumbling rapidly. The most heartbreaking moment came when Child Protective Services arrived to take Zoe into emergency custody. The little girl, pale and weak, clung to her social worker as she was led away from the only home she had ever known. Her wide eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and relief, haunted everyone who witnessed the scene. As news of the arrests broke, the town of Millbrook reeled in shock. The community that had rallied so strongly around the Hartleys now struggled to comprehend the betrayal. Neighbors who had brought casseroles and organized fundraisers felt foolish and used. The hospital staff, who had worked tirelessly to diagnose Zoe's mysterious illness, were left questioning their judgment and expertise. As for Zoe, her recovery began the moment she was removed from her parents' care. Freed from the constant poisoning, her health improved rapidly. Her new foster parents, a kind couple vetted extensively by Child Protective Services, reported that her nightmares were becoming less frequent and she was slowly learning to trust again. In the courtroom, the details that emerged were even more disturbing than initially believed. Prosecutors presented evidence of years of calculated abuse, painting a picture of two individuals so consumed by their desire for attention and financial gain that they were willing to sacrifice their own child's health and well-being. Ryland, having already confessed, appeared a broken man throughout the proceedings. He testified against his wife in exchange for a plea deal, his voice barely audible as he recounted their descent into criminality. Scarlett, by contrast, maintained her innocence until the very end, her eyes cold and defiant as the verdict was read. As the trial concluded, both Ryland and Scarlett were found guilty on multiple counts of child abuse, fraud, and endangerment. Ryland's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence of 20 years, while Scarlett was sentenced to 30 years without the possibility of parole.